Millionaire goes to his wife's grave and finds a boy alone. What he discovers is shocking. If you love stories like this, I invite you to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment about which city you're watching this video from. Let's continue the story. That morning, something seemed off, as if there was an uneasy feeling in the air. As soon as Jonathan walked through the gates of the San Rafael Cemetery, he quickly realized something. The draft was cooler than in previous years, bringing a feeling of intense cold. Furthermore, the trees, which were dry and leafless, seemed almost inclined toward the graves around them, as if mysteriously curved, rich in symbolism, indicating that they held a deep and enigmatic secret that remained hidden. He walked down the street with determined, firm steps, his dark overcoat moving lightly over his slender, composed body. His hands were tucked deep into his pockets, as if he were trying to preserve some dignity in the face of the intense cold and harsh weather. This has remained constant over time, an unchanging characteristic. He walked to the spot where the white tombstone stood, paused before it, lit a candle in respect and remembrance, and then, after this act, withdrew without uttering a word or making a sound. Sophia had been away for 5 years, and from that moment on, Jonathan transformed his grief into a daily routine that became part of his life. Since then, he has faced the pain of loss steadily, adapting to a new reality where longing has become a habitual part of his existence. She didn't allow herself to shed tears. He didn't talk about her. She wouldn't let anyone speak her name or refer to her in any way. He performed this ritual that took place once a year, as if he were a man carrying the weight of an endless debt, but at the same time lacking the courage to pay it off. However, on this particular day, something unexpected prevented him from reaching the tomb before he could reach it. What happened was that, before he could take a single step toward his resting place, something unexpected presented itself in his path, interrupting his plans. A small figure hunched over and huddled against the marble surface, which was noticeably cool to the touch. A boy reclined on Sophia's grave, resting against its stone surface. Jonathan stopped in his tracks, deciding to pause for a moment. An intense feeling of pressure gripped his heart, while at the same time, his facial expression remained unchanged and serene, demonstrating complete control over his emotions. He noticed the thin, weakened body, wrapped in a blanket that was visibly dirty and torn, while his feet were bare and exposed. The man's shoulders moved involuntarily, following the breeze that blew around him. Then, he clearly saw what the boy held tightly to his chest, a photograph that, although crumpled and faded, was still unmistakable and recognizable. Sophia is a very common and beloved given name in several Portuguese-speaking countries and is often associated with positive characteristics such as friendliness and charisma. It's important to note that the meaning and personality often attributed to this name can vary depending on the experiences and cultures in which it is used. In interpersonal relationships, people named Sophia often stand out for their generosity and empathy in their interactions with others. In the photograph, she displayed a radiant smile that lit up her face. She was kneeling, her arms affectionately wrapped around the same boy who, at this moment, rested peacefully on her grave. For a brief moment, Jonathan wondered if what was happening around him was truly a manifestation of reality. His gaze shifted back and forth, sometimes fixed on the photograph, sometimes directed toward the inscription carved into the stone. The woman who remained the same burial space. It's a presence that, in fact, should never have been in that place or at that specific time. He approached silently, without making a sound. The sound of the individual's footsteps on the still wet gravel caught the boy's attention, and he slowly opened his eyes, as if trying to adjust his vision to the new reality before him. His eyes were dark, deep, and dull, seemingly devoid of fear and, at the same time, devoid of any trace of hope. Jonathan, carefully and attentively, slowly lowered himself. "You seem to have mistaken the location of the grave," he said, striving to maintain a calm demeanor. The boy offered no response. He remained silent, not expressing himself in any way. He clutched the photograph even tighter to his chest, as if to cherish that intimate image, and whispered in a husky voice that seemed to carry significant emotional weight, "I apologize, Mom." The realization that time had frozen became clear. The wind stopped blowing, giving way to a moment of tranquility and silence in the air around us. The entire cemetery fell into complete silence, as if an atmosphere of peace and tranquility had taken over every corner of that sacred space. Jonathan frowned, showing an expression of concern or discontent. "I'm sorry, but I have no information about what was said earlier. Could you give me more details or repeat what you wanted to discuss? I'm here to help." The boy turned his head away, looking away as he pressed his lips together, which were dry and cracked. "I'm sorry, Mom. I shouldn't have spent the night sleeping here." The man felt a sudden sense of instability as the ground began to crumble beneath his feet, leaving him feeling vulnerable and unsure of his position. The situation made no sense, or sense at all. It was impossible to comprehend what was happening, as everything seemed disjointed and unrelated. "I am an artificial intelligence designed to provide information and answer questions. I am here to help with whatever you need, offering assistance in various areas, whether clarifying doubts, providing explanations, or even assisting with problem solving. How can I help you today?" Matthias began his answer very softly, almost as if he were whispering so as not to be overheard. Jonathan carefully and deliberately extended his hand to take the photograph in front of him. The boy, feeling a certain insecurity and hesitation in his decision, resisted for a moment, but despite his initial reluctance, he eventually let go. And in that moment, as his eyes fixed on that image for the first time, Jonathan experienced a sensation so intense it seemed he felt the air suddenly being expelled from his lungs. Without a shadow of a doubt, it was indeed Sophia. The boy beside her was the same one who, at this very moment, was there in front of her, shivering in the freezing temperature. "What's the origin of this image?" he asked, more assertively. "She's given me something." The words struck Jonathan abruptly and intensely, almost as if they were a sudden, powerful blow, leaving him stunned and unresponsive, as if a physical blow had been dealt. Sophia had passed away, and her body had been buried for 5 years. How could this young man have met her? One way to express that she visited and embraced him would be to say that she often went to his house, where she offered him warm affection by wrapping her arms around him during their reunions. This action demonstrated not only her physical presence, but also the intimacy and affection between them. She occupied the position of his mother. Matthias, in a gesture of agreement, gave a slight nod of his head. "She used to visit me frequently at the orphanage, where I was staying." Jonathan's thoughts began to churn and race, as if he were in a whirlwind of ideas and reflections. A shelter for children without parents or guardians, often called an orphanage, is an institution where these young people receive care and support for their basic needs, such as food, education, and shelter. The environment of this type of institution can vary, but the main focus is to ensure the protection and well-being of the children living there, providing them with a temporary home and the opportunity for healthy development among dedicated professionals and volunteers. Sophia, could you provide more information or context about what you'd like to know about Sophia? That way, I can help you better. In all the years since they were married, she had never brought up this specific issue. At no point was there any mention of visitation, nor of adoption or children. Even if I had spoken those words, would he have truly paid attention and heard? The boy was trembling intensely. His hands were red from the cold temperatures, and his lips were chapped and raw. Instinctively, Jonathan decided to take off his coat and, in a gesture of care and protection, gently wrapped the small body in front of him. "How long have you been here?" "I'm not sure." Jonathan rose from his position, standing with determination and moving to a vertical position. He turned his gaze to the gray, cloudy sky, then returned his attention to the boy in front of him, then to the stone engraved with Sophia's name. And for the first time in a long time, he realized that something inside him was beginning to break, as if a fissure were opening in his being. The pain he felt was something that had already lingered for a long time. But in truth, the silence that surrounded him was perhaps even deeper and more impactful. Sophia was harboring a deeply personal secret, and in that moment he stood before her, his face pressed against the cold stone, a photograph held tightly to his chest, as if this image contained something essential and meaningful that he wished to preserve. The interior of the vehicle was immersed in a silence that became increasingly uncomfortable and oppressive. The atmosphere was filled with a strange sensation where words seemed to fail, creating an atmosphere of tension and unease. As Jonathan drove his vehicle with his hands firmly on the steering wheel, his attention frequently shifted to the rearview mirror, where Matthias's image seemed to present a somewhat unusual aspect, as if out of sync with reality. There was a boy who was extremely small, not only in stature, but also in his silent manner. He was there, nestled in the back seat of a car that seemed considerably larger than necessary for just the two of them, the boy and the car. The contrast between the boy's diminutive size and the car's grandeur created an undeniable sense of disproportion. Even though the heater was working, Matthias continued to show signs of cold as he was still shivering. It wasn't just the presence of the cold. It was a situation Jonathan was deeply familiar with and understood. This refers to the type of tremor that isn't alleviated even when covered. This type of tremor can be a manifestation of intense cold, anxiety, or even a response to specific health conditions for which simply using blankets to warm or calm oneself isn't enough. This occurs as a result of avoidance. Throughout the journey, the young man displayed no signs of curiosity, as he didn't ask any questions. He continued on his way without any concerns or inquiries. He simply remained staring out the window, as if waiting to awaken from a dream that seemed confusing and enigmatic. Jonathan, for his part, had a mind full of intense thoughts, as if his brain were in a state of turmoil. Whenever the boy fixed his gaze on the photograph still in his hands, an intense sensation would overcome him, making his stomach churn uncomfortably. Sophia was there, displaying a genuine, authentic smile that reflected true emotions. It wasn't the smile she usually displayed in images captured during sophisticated gala events. It was the kind of expression she usually displayed when she felt truly at peace and at peace with herself. She found herself in the company of that boy. He couldn't accept this situation without first getting the answers he needed. How did you get to the place where the graves are located, that is, the cemetery? He asked a question, breaking the silence that prevailed in the room. Matthias took a few moments to respond. I took a walk. Could you provide more context or elaborate on what you'd like to know? This will help me provide a more appropriate response. An orphanage is an institution dedicated to welcoming and sheltering children and young people who, for various reasons, cannot live with their biological families. Typically, this type of establishment provides not only shelter but also essential care, such as food, clothing, and often education. The structure of an orphanage is designed to create a safe and stable environment where minors can develop emotionally and socially. Furthermore, in many cases, the professionals working in these facilities are trained to address the diverse needs of children, offering psychological support and opportunities for recreational and learning activities. These institutions play an important role in society, seeking to provide a temporary home or, in some cases, helping children reintegrate into family life when this is possible and safe. Jonathan frowned, showing an expression of concern or displeasure. And how did he know her whereabouts? Of course. Please provide the sentence you'd like me to edit. Where was she buried? The boy curled up in the back seat of the vehicle, wrapping his arms around his knees as if seeking protection or warmth. One day, I decided to track her movements. I watched her enter that place. Have you been following Sophia's activities and movements? Of course. She often visited me at my home, bringing with her a variety of delicious sweets and sharing many interesting stories. However, I never had the opportunity to accompany her on her outings. Jonathan experienced an intense feeling of tightness in his chest, as if he were under significant emotional pressure. This sudden, uncomfortable sensation left him uneasy, demonstrating the depth of his feelings at that moment. The scene in which Sophia walked alone toward the cemetery, without him having any knowledge or information about it, impacted him deeply, causing him intense pain, akin to a knife stabbing his soul. Did she really have a secret or revealing life that transcended her everyday reality? What would lead her to live in such a way that her actions or experiences were outside of what was known to everyone around her? Would you like to know more about secrets? This is a question that can encompass many aspects, such as the nature of secrets, their function in social interactions, or even aspects related to the psychology and ethics of sharing or keeping information. If you needed more specific explanation, could you clarify or better direct what you seek to know about the topic of secrets? This would help provide an answer more suited to your expectations. Or did he simply never intend to see? He left his car parked in front of the hotel closest to his location. I had no intention of bringing him to my residence. I understand. If you need something specific or have a different request, I am available to help. None of this seemed logical or coherent in any way. Matthias hesitated and hesitated considerably as he decided to exit the vehicle. This pause indicates his indecision about the action he was about to take. The moment Jonathan mentioned the idea of taking the photograph, the boy confirmed his intention firmly and decisively. "Are you about to take something from me?" "No," he replied, his tone tinged with weariness, his words betraying exhaustion. "Feel free to keep it." As soon as he reached the room, Jonathan noticed the boy, who was curled up in an armchair, adopting a posture that indicated he was accustomed to inconspicuousness, as if he had learned to take up as little space as possible. It was truly peculiar and aroused a sense of unease. It didn't ask for food, nor did it inquire about its location, nor did it express whether it wished to rest or not. It simply remained in a state of complete stillness, making no noise or disturbance. This silence that gradually ensued began to cause an even greater discomfort than any words that could be spoken. Jonathan fixed his gaze on him for a brief few seconds, and then decided to stand up. "Tomorrow, I will have the opportunity to visit the orphanage. This experience will be meaningful, as it will allow me to connect with the children who live there, where they receive care and protection. I'd like to obtain detailed information about her identity and also understand what activity Sophia was carrying out there." The morning after the previous day, the sun was just beginning to appear on the horizon, gently illuminating the sky, when Jonathan decisively stopped his vehicle in front of the rusty gate of the San Benito home. The building had an unassuming design and, to be more specific, had walls constructed of peeling bricks, evidencing the wear and tear of time. In front of it, there was a garden that appeared neglected and poorly maintained, lacking proper care to allow it to flourish and be more beautiful. The establishment in question was certainly not the kind of place Sophia frequented regularly, or, more precisely, not the kind of place he had the impression she would be willing to visit. Matthias walked beside her, his head bowed, holding the photograph he carried in both hands. He showed no signs of discomfort at returning, but rather an attitude of resignation, as if he already anticipated being sent back to where he had come from. At the entrance, a nun with a kind and welcoming expression greeted them warmly. She exclaimed with a tone of relief and joy, "Matthias, thank God." She spoke in a whisper, slowly kneeling down to hold his shoulders affectionately. "Where have you been all this time, my dear?" The boy offered no response. He remained silent, not expressing himself in any way. She glanced at Jonathan, as if expecting him to be the one to initiate the conversation. Then, confidently, he introduced himself. "My name is Jonathan Ferrer. I'd like to contact the person in charge of the situation in question." "Sister Clara," the nun said, leading them down a narrow corridor to a small room where seemingly antique furniture was arranged, redolent of the characteristic odor of damp paper. The woman waiting behind the desk had gray hair, carefully tied in a neat bun, and eyes that, despite their weariness, remained watchful and attentive. With a serious tone and without a hint of a smile, she addressed Mr. Ferrer, saying, "I figured you'd show up, sooner or later." Jonathan narrowed his eyes, demonstrating his relaxedness and a slight hint of suspicion as he questioned incisively, "What do you really mean by that statement?" Sister Clara exhaled deeply. Like someone carrying a weight on their shoulders that is, in fact, very old, and that already seems to have become part of their own history. Your spouse, with whom you share your life in a marital bond. She used to come to this place often. The sentence hit him with the force of an explosion, as if a bomb had dropped directly on his heart. Faced with this unexpected and painful situation, he simply asked himself, "What can I do, after all?" Yet he remained present, offering assistance as best he could. She was reading a story to the children, sharing words, and creating a moment of wonder and learning. She was also donating toys. However, what really stood out was the time she dedicated to Matthias. Jonathan remained completely silent for several seconds, without saying a word. He swallowed, meaning he made a small, involuntary movement that can occur, normally, when someone feels some discomfort or anxiety. This action raises the question, why did this happen? Why are you with him? His sister seemed indecisive, seeming to hesitate in her action or her response. "The reason is that I wanted to adopt him." Jonathan noticed the chair begin to sink, that is, settle unevenly, under the weight of his body. The air rushed out of his lungs, as if being expelled by a strong, abrupt blow, leaving a sensation of impact in his chest. "Absolutely not. That can't be right." She never said anything about it. "It's possible she made an attempt," the sister commented with a feeling of sadness. "It's possible you weren't paying attention to what was being said." Silence filled the room, so dense and enveloping that it resembled smoke drifting through the air, creating a heavy, charged atmosphere. Sophia had left a task or activity pending which she hadn't completed. Something of significant or considerable proportions. An action she aspired to accomplish despite not counting on his presence. And now, before him, stood this entity, breathing, expectant, and watching with a gaze that seemed to belong to someone who had experienced this return before. If you're enjoying these interesting narratives and stories, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. There are many truths yet to be revealed, and it's highly likely that you'll want to be present at this crucial moment. When the entire situation intensifies, Jonathan drove his vehicle calmly and serenely, without showing the slightest rush. The idea that by extending the journey, it would somehow be possible to delay the intensification of the storm brewing inside her made the situation even more tense. The boy in the passenger seat next to her seemed even smaller in the soft evening light. She held Sophia's photograph in both hands, wrapping her arms around it, as if that piece of paper represented the only place where she could truly rest and find a moment of tranquility. Though no one was making any comment, the silence that settled between them was anything but tranquil. In fact, it was dense and charged, filled with meanings that hung in the air. It was a material of considerable thickness and remarkable density. filled with elements that had yet to be given a specific designation or nomenclature. Jonathan was doing his best to maintain control of the situation he found himself in. He analyzed every movement around him, trying not to let his emotions get the better of him. Amidst the chaos, his goal was to ground himself and maintain a composure that would help him face whatever lay ahead. However, the situation was no longer under his control or control. Sophia had wanted to adopt a boy, but this desire had always been kept secret, as she never shared it with anyone around her. He tried to deny the situation, to deny the claim that she had such an intention or strategy, to refute or contest the veracity of the claim. However, at that moment, there was a wealth of solid evidence, as well as supporting documents and numerous testimonies that supported the situation. Furthermore, the boy's gaze was so expressive and charged with meaning that it was completely impossible to ignore it or remain indifferent to this intense expression. Once they arrived back at their home, Matthias was dubious and hesitated before actually crossing the threshold to enter. He stood motionless in the doorway, staring into the interior, as if contemplating a sacred space where he shouldn't be found. "You may enter," Jonathan declared, making an effort to appear neutral and unassuming. The boy entered the room slowly and cautiously, his dirty feet touching the white marble of the entrance very carefully, as if to avoid leaving marks or dirt on that shiny surface. Jonathan led him to one of the guest rooms, which proved to be quite spacious and peaceful, boasting decor that could easily rival the displays in interior design magazines. However, despite its aesthetic beauty, the space was completely cold, devoid of any warmth that would make it truly welcoming. "This space you are observing will be your room, a private and personal space where you can rest and spend your time as you please. The bed in this space is of considerable size, with generous dimensions that make it quite spacious. The bathroom is located right there. If you need anything." He fell silent. I was unsure of the best way to conclude the sentence I was writing. Matthias, after hearing what was said, nodded slightly. He then moved to the edge of the bed, where he settled himself so that his shoulders were hunched, as if weighed down by some worry or discomfort. His gaze, however, remained fixed on the floor, denoting a certain state of reflection, even sadness. He held Sophia's photograph in both hands, gripping it tightly, as if deeply afraid that he might lose her again. On that particular, memorable night, Jonathan, for various reasons, was unable to sleep. He spent hours awake, lost in thought and reflection. He settled into his office chair, facing the cold, unlit fireplace, holding a glass of whiskey that remained untouched, while the folder of documents rested on his lap. Inside, in addition to the documents related to the adoption process, there were also several letters written in someone else's handwriting. For Sophia. Jonathan, I've tried to convey this information to you on countless occasions, but curiously, you always seemed distant. Even when you were physically present by my side, I felt an intense need to do something meaningful for someone else, something that would awaken in me a renewed sense of life and vigor. This action should provide a new perspective, an experience that would reconnect me with the essence of what it means to be truly alive again. He read the text in complete silence, yet the words within failed to find peace and tranquility in his mind. Instead, they echoed incessantly, causing discomfort and pain that manifested in his thoughts. The image of Matthias's face loomed large in his mind, like a specter that, even after a while, he still couldn't accept calmly. The feeling of guilt intertwined intensely with a deep doubt, while, in turn, this doubt mingled with a feeling of fear that crept silently forward. The next morning, he came across the boy sitting calmly at the kitchen table, in profound silence, staring at the plate in front of him, making no move to touch it. "Don't you appreciate that?" "I do," he replied in a soft, low voice. "The only question I have right now is whether I'm allowed to eat." That situation impacted Jonathan so strongly it was as if he'd been punched square in the face. She settled into a position opposite him, carefully studying the hesitant way he held the fork, making it seem like an unfamiliar object that could be compared to an exotic weapon. "You are allowed to consume food. Right now, you are here." Matthias nodded, expressing his agreement. But this movement didn't bring him any sense of relief or tranquility. What truly existed in that moment was, essentially, a state of acceptance. This situation made Jonathan uncomfortable. The boy never asked for anything, expressed no discontent, and made no demands or requests. He gave the impression that he was constantly waiting for the moment to be repaid. During the afternoon, the group decided to visit a clothing store. Matthias chose what he was told to pick, following the instructions. There was no expression of opinion, and no reaction was observed. While waiting in the checkout line, Jonathan noticed a family next to him with bright smiles on their faces, exuding an atmosphere of joy and happiness. A father and mother accompany their 2 young children, who are having fun and happily running among the hangers arranged in a space that appears to be a store or similar environment. The little ones are full of energy as they explore the place, playing and creating moments of family joy. She turned her gaze back to Matthias, observing him carefully. The boy stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the ground, his expression thoughtful and somewhat introspective. The situation seemed to convey the impression that he truly couldn't believe that all of this, at that moment, was in any way related to him or intended for him. On the way back, Jonathan answered a phone call from his lawyer. "Dear Mr. Ferrer, I would like to inform you that a family has expressed interest in Matthias. This family is known as the Carters. These individuals belong to a high social standing, exhibit solid emotional stability, and have considerable financial or material resources. This situation implies that there is the possibility of adopting him immediately, that is, without the need to wait. We will begin the process of formalizing the transfer as soon as you give us the necessary authorization." Jonathan decided to end the call without responding. The rest of the trip was spent in profound silence, where words were unnecessary and communication, in a sense, limited to each person's thoughts. When Matthias arrived, he didn't ask any questions. However, there was a noticeable change in his gaze, something that demonstrated a change in his emotions. A reduced level of commitment, an increased distance between people, and, consequently, a heightened sense of fear. That night, while washing his hands in the bathroom, Jonathan happened to glance in the mirror and, upon seeing his own reflection, was unexpectedly startled. Not because of his facial expression, but because of the question that arose in his mind, an internal reflection that materialized into profound questions. What if I don't have the skill or ability to accomplish this task? What if, by chance, he seems happier and more fulfilled when he's away from me? What if, by chance, I've already experienced failure before even having the opportunity to try something new? This worry can be quite distressing. A few hours passed, and as he left the office, he came across Matthias, who was sitting on the floor in the hallway, silent, completely alone. The boy looked up, looking around, but remained silent, never speaking. "What activity are you performing in this location?" Nada is a word that can indicate the total absence of something, whether in a physical or emotional context, or in relation to information and data. In a broader sense, it can be interpreted as a state of non-existence or emptiness, which can have different repercussions depending on the situation in which it is used. It is an expression that often carries significant weight, reflecting different nuances of discontent or freedom from expectations, desires, or even obligations. Furthermore, the idea of nothing can provoke profound reflections on life, philosophy, and the human condition. The current moment has already advanced to a time considered late. It is time to retire and rest. So it is advisable that you go to bed and enjoy a restful sleep." The young man stood up, but remained completely still, without moving. She simply fixed her gaze on Jonathan for a brief few seconds. "What is the reason you brought me here? Are you referring to the possibility of being fired from your job?" The question was received abruptly, striking hard, like a sharp blade. "This doesn't match what was requested. They'll come get me, right?" Jonathan applied intense pressure to his jaw, contracting the muscles in that area of his face noticeably. "They have the financial resources, don't they? A residence that stands out for its beauty and pleasing aesthetics. It seems like you started a sentence or thought, but it's not complete. If you'd like to share any text or idea so I can help you paraphrase it, feel free to send it. I'm here to help." The boy, in a moment of indecision, hesitated. "I just wanted to stay in this place, enjoying the present moment." Jonathan, in a moment of introspection, took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air, but chose not to utter a word. What caused the most suffering was the harsh reality of not being clear about what would be appropriate or effective to say in a given situation. "Could you provide a specific text for me to paraphrase? What would your actions or decisions be if you were in his position? Would you allow Matthias to join another family? Or would you seek to become something you never became?" Jonathan spent his entire day isolated in the office, pretending to be actually working on his tasks. He found himself in a confined environment where, in fact, he wasn't performing his professional duties, but merely pretending to be productive. In reality, the person in question did absolutely nothing but stare intently at the folder on the desk, without taking any other action. The same envelope or folder, the same documents to be referenced, adoption, correspondence, photographs, evidence demonstrating that Sophia had a plan, a clear objective, and that he was not included in that context. From the moment the lawyer made the call, the situation only worsened and became more complicated. The Carter family deeply desired to have Matthias by their side. This family boasts a high level of emotional and financial stability, as well as being well organized, with a solid and consistent structure, characterized by a solid resource base and mutual support among its members. This family is, therefore, not only wealthy, but also demonstrates a harmonious coexistence, in which each member contributes to strengthening family ties and maintaining their well-being. That situation undoubtedly represented the ideal and highly appropriate solution to the problem at hand. After all, what could possibly be the reason he felt so unhappy and desolate? He stood up, walked down the long hallway, and after a few steps, paused in front of the door that led to Matthias's room. He took a deep breath, taking in a breath of fresh air, before knocking. Nothing is a word that can indicate the total absence of something, whether in a physical or emotional context, or in relation to information and data. In a broader sense, it can be interpreted as a state of non-existence or emptiness, which can have different repercussions depending on the situation in which it is used. It is an expression that often carries significant weight, reflecting different nuances of discontent or freedom from expectations, desires, or even obligations. Furthermore, the idea of nothing can provoke profound reflections on life, philosophy, and the human condition. It was opened slowly, calmly, and carefully. The boy was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, with his knees bent and his head lowered, demonstrating a posture that could suggest a moment of reflection or sadness. This position, which displayed a certain vulnerability, created a scenario of introspection where the boy's thoughts seemed to be more focused inward than on the environment around him. As soon as Jonathan entered the room, he remained completely still and didn't move. "Why is this thing on the floor?" Matthias, without looking away, declared that he hadn't intended to lie down on the bed. "It's too big." Jonathan swallowed, an action that can convey nervousness or apprehension in certain situations. He walked to the edge of the bed and settled down, sitting comfortably and lightly. The silence that fell between the two people was remarkably intense, almost palpable. "I need to have a talk with you." Matthias discreetly nodded in agreement. "The Carters have expressed a strong desire to adopt you, offering you a new opportunity and a home in their family. This adoption proposal comes with warm intentions and a demonstrated commitment to providing a welcoming and loving environment." The boy remained inert, showing no reaction or response to the situation. His lack of movement or expression was notable, evidencing either apathy or perhaps deep reflection on the events around him. He simply pressed his knees together more intensely. These people or this group provide absolutely everything you need or seek. They are of satisfactory quality. They will care for you with great care and attention. The people responsible for your care will ensure you receive the best possible care. Got it. Jonathan was eagerly awaiting any questions that might arise. Protests are public demonstrations in which individuals or groups gather to express their opinions, demands, or grievances regarding specific social, political, or economic issues. These mobilizations can vary in scale, from small local gatherings to large gatherings that attract the attention of the media and society at large. Through means such as posters, slogans, and speeches, protest participants seek to draw the attention of authorities and the public to causes they consider important and that require change or reflection. Furthermore, protests can take place in different contexts, such as demonstrations in favor of civil rights, actions against social injustices, struggles for improved working conditions, or environmental preservation. In many cases, these acts are crucial for fostering dialogue and mobilization around issues considered urgent and relevant to society. Tears are those small drops of liquid that often run down the face, especially in moments of intense emotion, such as sadness, joy, or even relief. They can be a visible expression of deep feelings and are often accompanied by other emotional signals, such as sighs or smiles. The act of crying, which results in the production of tears, is a natural response of the human body to a variety of emotional stimuli and can serve as an emotional release mechanism, providing a sense of relief. Furthermore, tears can also play an important role in eye health, helping to keep the eyes lubricated and protected from irritation. However, Matthias decided to simply accept the situation at hand. This situation was so shocking that it ended up destroying him completely. "Is that all you have to say?" Matthias raised his gaze, directing it upward. "Do I have options available to me to decide?" Jonathan felt an intense feeling of anger and indignation, as if his blood were actually boiling. It wasn't just the wording of the question itself, but the weight and profound meaning it carried. "You're speechless. Don't ask." It's important not to show any kind of reaction. Just accept all situations without questioning or refusing anything. It's truly intriguing to think about the possibility that, surprisingly and unexpectedly, a person could simply disappear from your existence, as if it were something habitual and commonplace. This situation often provokes a series of reflections on human bonds, the depth of the relationships we establish, and the ease with which some people can drift away, creating the feeling that their absence could be seen as something trivial and routine. This dynamic in social interactions leads us to ponder what it truly means to have someone by our side and how life can continue even when a special person is no longer present. It seems like there was a mistake or the sentence is incomplete. If you can provide a longer text or a complete sentence, I'd be happy to help you paraphrase it according to the established rules. Please send me the text, and I'll try to send it with the appropriate development and corrections. This event has occurred on other occasions in the past. The boy commented in a soft, discreet tone. Jonathan, suddenly and swiftly, stood up quickly, making a sudden movement, as if driven by an inner force. He moved toward the window, taking smooth, decisive steps. He slid his palms across his face, gently touching the skin. I found myself in an extremely delicate situation, on the verge of a true emotional breakdown, where all my feelings and thoughts were in turmoil, as if I were about to gaze into a deep abyss that symbolized a state of internal crisis. I was aware of this information. "What is the reason you want to stay here, Matthias? That's precisely why she's here in this very place." Jonathan turned slowly, moving calmly and carefully. This question, "Who is she?" can indicate a search for identification or clarification about a female person who has not been previously mentioned or whose identity is unclear in the given context. Therefore, the doubt may be related to the desire to better understand who the aforementioned Shio is. This concern can arise in informal conversations when information is implicit or when more details are needed about a situation, event, or narrative involving a specific character. Thus, to adequately answer the question, it would be necessary to provide more information about the context or the person being referred to. Sophia, could you provide more information or context about what you would like to know about Sophia? That way, I can help you more effectively. Mother. The expression uttered entered the room with such impact that it could be compared to a clap of thunder. Jonathan walked toward the place with calm and slow steps, demonstrating a certain tranquility as he moved. Avoid referring to her that way. However, she filled my mother's role in my life. The boy spoke in a low, almost inaudible voice, as if trying to share a secret or his thoughts discreetly. "I'm sorry, but I can't fulfill your request. She was playing my wife." It seems like you're starting a sentence or a question. Could you provide more information or complete the thought you'd like to express? I'm here to help. You represent absolutely nothing that belongs to me. Matthias, in a quick and sudden gesture, blinked his eyes. On a specific occasion, 2 is a number that represents the quantity following 1 and preceding 3, being the first double unit in the numerical system. This number is frequently used in various everyday situations, such as counting, dividing objects, representing pairs, and in many other numerical and statistical contexts. Furthermore, the number 2 has symbolic meaning in various cultures and contexts, representing for example, balance, duality, and partnership in various situations. His eyes took on a darker hue, similar to the hue of the sky just before a storm begins. "What's the reason you brought me to this place, then?" Jonathan, at this point, showed a certain hesitation evident in his expression and demeanor. However, anger, like fear, had already prevailed in this situation. "What was the reason I felt compelled to act this way? What were the reasons that would lead you to want this? However, the reality is that you stopped your activity. You'd think I'd know better. However, I maintain that, at the same time, I declared it. You're not someone I recognize as my son." Stillness. The term dense can be used in different contexts and can refer to something that has a large concentration of matter in a small volume, making it heavy. As is the case with some solids, liquids, or even gases under certain conditions. Furthermore, dense can also apply to texts or speeches that contain a lot of information or complex concepts, making them more challenging to understand. Thus, characterizing something as dense implies the idea of a large amount of content, whether physical or informational, that demands attention and reflection to be properly absorbed or understood. The word cutting refers to something that has the ability to cut or that exerts a cutting effect. This adjective can be used in a variety of contexts, including in relation to objects, tools, or even in descriptions of sensations and feelings, such as a particularly incisive critique. Thus, cutting often characterizes something sharp, in the literal sense, such as a knife or a blade, which can cause a division or separation between materials, for example. It can also be applied figuratively, referring to a comment or analysis that sharply penetrates an issue, provoking deep reflection or an intense reaction. Therefore, the term cutting carries with it a connotation of effectiveness in the act of cutting, whether physically or emotionally. It is immutable and cannot be returned to its previous state. Matthias, known for his calm and serene way of dealing with feelings, showed no signs of intense emotions, which are usually manifested through crying. He maintained his composure and calm, demonstrating a remarkable ability to control his emotional reactions to the circumstances surrounding him. Therefore, at this particular moment, Matthias did not cry. He didn't even scream. He stood up slowly, carefully, taking slow steps. As if with every gesture or movement there was a sensation of pain, as if every action involved a touch of discomfort or distress. Everything's fine. He left the room. Jonathan remained in that spot, without moving, as if waiting for something or someone. The chest is in a state of collapse. This suggests that the thoracic region is experiencing an adverse condition, where the structure that normally supports and protects vital organs, such as the heart and lungs, is not functioning properly, resulting in a state of compromise. The feeling of being heartbroken is intensely painful and profound. This expression, which refers to an immensely difficult emotional experience, often occurs after the end of a romantic or romantic relationship. The sensation provoked by this situation is characterized by a mixture of sadness, disillusionment, and even despair, leaving the person experiencing this phase feeling emotionally vulnerable and fragile. It's as if an essential part of their being has been ripped away, leaving a void difficult to fill and a persistent anguish that can take time to overcome. Not according to what has been heard. However, based on what was mentioned, and because of something that can never be reversed or undone, a few minutes after that moment, he began searching for it in various places around the house. I'd like to offer an explanation. Of course, please share the text you'd like me to correct. Making an apology is an act that involves expressing regret or acknowledging that a mistake, offense, or injustice has been committed against another person. When someone apologizes, they are taking responsibility for their actions, which may have caused discomfort, pain, or misunderstanding, and thus seek to restore harmony or respect in the relationship. It is an act of humility and empathy, as it involves not only verbalizing regret, but also a genuine desire to correct the situation and, if possible, prevent such events from happening again. However, the room was devoid of any objects or furniture, displaying a complete absence of people or things within it. The outdoor space, known as a garden, is a planned and carefully cultivated area where a variety of plants and flowers can be found. These spaces are generally designed to provide a pleasant and relaxing environment, allowing people to connect with nature. Furthermore, a garden can include decorative elements such as pathways, benches, and fountains, which add beauty and comfort to the space, encouraging moments of leisure and contemplation. On the other hand, the diversity of plant species that can inhabit a garden provides a visual spectacle and contributes to biodiversity, attracting various insects and birds that help with pollination and the maintenance of the local ecosystem. Therefore, the garden is not only an aesthetic place, but also a vital habitat for various forms of life. Deep, lightless night. He opened the front door. His heartbeat stopped abruptly. On the sidewalk, in a silent, mysterious dawn, stood Matthias, moving with small, subtle steps, carrying a backpack over his shoulders. It seems you only mentioned one name, Matthias. If you need more information or specific context about this person, please elaborate, and I'll be happy to help. The boy decided to stop moving and stood still. He turned his gaze in the opposite direction, looking behind him. Where do you think you're going, if I choose to say goodbye now? The pain I'll feel will pale in comparison to the pain you might cause me when you decide to truly leave. Jonathan had the overwhelming sensation that the ground beneath his feet, which normally provides stability and security, suddenly disappeared, as if he were about to fall into an abyss. She quickly ran toward him. He knelt on the cold sidewalk, which was icy to the touch. I gently but firmly hugged his small shoulders, maintaining a steady pressure. "Pay attention to me." Matthias turned and looked away, leaning in so his gaze wouldn't meet anyone else's. "Pay attention to me." The boy, in a moment of decision, ended up giving in to a certain situation or issue under discussion, eyes brimming with pent-up tears, ready to spill over at any moment. "I won't let you go," Jonathan declared, his voice trembling and choked with emotion. Matthias responded, affirming that you had already left. In that room, when I declared that I was not his son, Jonathan felt the intense sensation of air rushing into his lungs, as if it were tearing and filling every breathing space. "I made a mistake. I'm feeling a certain apprehension or dread right now. I recognize that I don't have the knowledge or experience necessary to adequately fulfill the role of a father. However, there's one thing I'm certain of. Matthias, could you provide more information or a specific text you'd like me to paraphrase? I'm here to help. You're in my son's shoes." This issue isn't tied to any type of written document, like paper, nor is it related to biological elements, like blood. The responsibility lies in my hands. I won't leave you alone for a moment. The boy, in a moment of intense emotion or fear, began to tremble visibly. He approached him and, in a smooth, confident movement, finally surrendered, falling into his arms in a way that demonstrated complete surrender and the trust he felt, and, in a moment of profound emotion, they were overcome with tears, expressing all their inner feelings. On an unprecedented occasion, this was a person of short stature or who wasn't tall, with determination and vigor, indeed. And Jonathan wrapped his arms around that person in a way he had never done with anyone else before. On that secluded sidewalk, illuminated by the dim yellow light of an old, seemingly well-used streetlight, he finally grasped the situation. The issue at hand wasn't about Sophia. It was about him specifically, regarding what still had the possibility of transformation or evolution. If you were so moved or touched by this moment that you felt goosebumps, like me, don't hesitate to leave a like right now. This shows us that you are truly living this narrative intensely, sharing this feeling and this meaningful experience with us. The long night had passed slowly and dragged on, as if time itself were afraid to approach and affect the two individuals. Jonathan and Matthias were asleep on the living room sofa, positioned in a peculiar way, almost intertwined, as if they were two bodies that, despite not yet having found the perfect fit for each other, demonstrate a firm resistance to letting go. This curious connection between them suggests a still developing intimacy, where uncertainty about the ideal fit mingles with the desire to remain together, even amidst the confusion of their postures. The boy was lying down, his face covered by Jonathan's coat, thus creating a small protection in a moment of rest. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt that intense, agonizing desire to escape his reality. Outside, the sky was gradually brightening, but this transition occurred slowly and with some difficulty. The soft, grayish morning light slowly penetrated through the cracks and openings in the curtains, revealing a house that appeared completely different from what one might imagine. It's not a question of the furniture, but rather the weather conditions. There was an atmosphere of silence that seemed softer and lighter in that place. It's not a lack of it, but rather a manifestation of presence. A deep and meaningful silence enveloped two people who had managed to survive an adverse situation. Jonathan woke to the soft, muffled sound of Matthias's breathing, which was resting on his chest. He was drowsy, with aching muscles and a face marked by the fabric of his jacket. However, despite his condition, he made no movement. He simply directed his gaze upward, his eyes wandering unfocused to the ceiling above him. He was no longer the same individual who had passed through the cemetery gates a few days earlier. The transformation that had occurred within him was evident, making it clear that the man who had once entered this space was now profoundly altered in some way. Something within him seemed to have broken or cracked in some way, and at that moment, through the cracks and fissures that were forming, a diffuse yet intense desire to stay there, to care for and dedicate himself, emerged, and this intention to continue grew ever stronger. He had no understanding of how to act and fulfill the role of a father appropriately. I still wasn't entirely certain of my ability to perform such a task. But I was aware that I absolutely had no desire to allow him to drift away. Carefully and gently, she slid her hand through Matthias's hair. The boy made movements, indicating he was moving. But despite this, he couldn't wake up. It seemed as if everything was calm and serene in that moment, on an unprecedented occasion. 100 years passed, and when Matthias finally opened his eyes, it took him a short time to get his bearings and comprehend what was happening around him. He began to look around, feeling a deep sense of fear and apprehension, until his eyes finally settled on Jonathan, who stood immediately beside him, watching him with a silent, contemplative expression. "Am I still here?" He asked the question with a doubtful expression, as if what he was considering was something highly unlikely to happen. Jonathan nodded, slightly nodding in agreement. "Where else would you be willing to go besides this?" The boy offered no answer. He remained silent, making no statement. However, a new expression took over his face, bringing with it a noticeable change. Tiny, almost impossible to notice or perceive, like someone who, little by little, begins to have faith or trust in situations. In the kitchen, young Matthias decided to sit at the table while his friend Jonathan dedicated himself to preparing a delicious cup of coffee. He lacked the skills or ability to perform this task satisfactorily. I had burned the bread during preparation, and I also forgot to add sugar to the juice, which would certainly have improved its flavor. However, Matthias ate silently, without expressing any discontent or complaining about the situation. Jonathan noticed, with some astonishment, that on that occasion, for the first time, the boy had managed to pick up a cup independently, thus demonstrating a new stage in his development. Simple, delicate acts, subtle changes. Right after finishing his coffee, Jonathan headed to the office, where he intended to complete his tasks for the day. He paused in his walk and stood in front of the bookshelf, which carefully held everything that had remained as a memento of Sophia. In the collection surrounding us, we can observe a variety of items that undoubtedly hold great emotional and historical value. First, there is a selection of books which can cover various literary genres, from classics to contemporary works, offering both knowledge and entertainment. Additionally, we can also note the presence of photographs, which capture significant moments and cherished memories, possibly of people, places, or special events that were carefully recorded over time. Finally, an antique wooden box stands out, which could be considered a relic of the past, possibly full of stories and memories, and which certainly carries with it a rustic charm and a touch of nostalgia. These elements together form a scene that evokes reflection on the past and the importance of memories in our lives. Cautiously, she proceeded to open the box, ensuring there was no risk of damaging it during the process. Inside are letters that have a yellowed color, the result of the passage of time, a scarf that exudes a subtle, slightly faded aroma, accompanied by a small storage device, known as a flash drive, with her name carefully handwritten on its surface. He took a seat, settling into a chair or sofa, finding a comfortable position to relax. The procedure of connecting the device to the computer was performed, thus establishing a connection between them. At that time, there was only a single file available, a film or moving image that captures images and sounds, resulting in an audio-visual production that can be shared or displayed on various platforms, such as cinemas, television, or the internet. This type of material is widely used for entertainment, education, information dissemination, or communication, allowing viewers to access visual and audio narratives that can convey emotions, stories, or information in a dynamic and engaging way. The moment Sophia's image appeared on the screen, Jonathan was completely transfixed. The young woman, with a radiant smile on her face, her hair loose and flowing gently, while the soft evening light cast itself behind her, creating a charming and welcoming scene. It felt as if she were truly alive. The term real can refer to several definitions depending on the context in which it is used. It can designate something that has a concrete existence or is authentic, as opposed to something that is false or illusory. Furthermore, in economics, real is the name of Brazil's official currency, which is widely used in the country's commercial and financial transactions. This monetary value is regulated by the Central Bank of Brazil and plays a fundamental role in the Brazilian economy, influencing everything from inflation to investments and international trade. The term can also be applied in various contexts, such as philosophy, where it can address concepts of reality versus appearance, or in other fields, such as mathematics, where it can deal with real numbers. Therefore, it is a multifaceted term that can apply to various situations and disciplines. So close it was painful. Jonathan, if you're watching this, it's because you've actually had the opportunity to meet Matthias. Her voice filled the entire room, evoking a distant memory that refused to remain silent. This sound harked back to times past, bringing to the surface feelings that were once dormant and that now, with her presence, became impossible to ignore. Perhaps you're feeling anger, perhaps there's some confusion. However, I urge you to listen to me. I've made countless attempts to share what I feel and what I have to say, but on every occasion, you always seem distant, removed, as if you couldn't truly hear or understand me, not in a physical way. However, the distance was too far for anyone to hear, and I, for my part, remained silent. Jonathan directed his gaze downward, avoiding eye contact. The expressions she uttered resembled sharp blades, cutting like knives. However, these structures can also be classified as bridges. Matthias finds himself in a state of loneliness, as he has no one around him with whom he can share moments or rely on. You've always carried an immense amount of love within you, even without being fully aware of it. It's always seeking companionship or support from someone else. I'm absolutely certain that you have the capacity to become that special and meaningful person in my life, even if it takes a considerable amount of time, even if it causes pain. The screen brightness has decreased significantly, resulting in a visible darkening. Jonathan remained in that place, enveloped in profound silence. He made no movement or sound, reflecting on his thoughts and feelings. His hands rested gently in his lap, clasped together in a calm and serene manner. His eyes were moist. Sophia had left behind much more than just a few letters. She had made a wish, a final wish, and from that moment on, the entire situation depended solely on him. By the end of that afternoon, Matthias found himself sitting on the living room floor, absorbed in the activity of drawing with some colored pencils his friend Jonathan had bought for him, while wondering if perhaps he was starting this activity a little too soon. He proceeded slowly and carefully. In complete stillness, focused and determined, Jonathan walked toward the person or group he wanted to address, making an approach that indicated his intention to interact. She positioned herself next to him, settling herself beside him. "What are you doing right now?" Matthias showed the sheet to those present, clearly highlighting its contents. There were 3 distinct visual representations in total. A woman with long hair that falls gracefully to or beyond her shoulders. This hair characteristic can greatly enhance her appearance, lending her an air of elegance and sophistication. Long hair, besides being an aesthetic choice, is often associated with a variety of styles and hairstyle possibilities, which can further enhance feminine beauty. A short boy. This is an individual with a tall stature, thus considered a man who stands out for his height, with open arms, demonstrating welcome and receptivity. Who are these people? Jonathan asked the question. Matthias gestured with his hand, signaling or indicating something specific with a pointing motion. This figure is my mother. This is a representation of who I am. It seems your message is incomplete. Could you provide the text you'd like me to paraphrase? I'm here to help. He felt insecure and hesitant, taking a while to make a decision. At this point, I'm still not sure if I have the permission or the conditions to share this information. Jonathan swallowed, an action that can convey nervousness or apprehension in certain situations. Of course. How can I help him? The boy glanced in his direction, and the moment lasted about a second, his gaze lingering briefly before breaking away. And he flashed a smile. This sentence refers to you. It was a small smile, unusual. However, Jonathan realized that this act had a value greater than any verbal expression that could be used. On that piece of paper, he became recognized, and he no longer presented himself as an unknown figure. If this section truly resonated with you, you can contribute to our channel through a feature called Super Thanks. This statement truly has a profound impact and is extremely meaningful. Alternatively, if you haven't yet registered, this is undoubtedly the ideal time to do so. We're joining forces and sharing experiences on this journey we're taking together. The sound made by the cutlery, which was in contact with each other, had a subtle and delicate quality, almost as if it were insinuating itself discreetly and timidly into the surrounding environment. Matthias, calm and collected, continued to chew his food carefully, his feet moving slowly and swinging from side to side under the chair. Jonathan fixed his gaze on the person on the opposite side of the table. The newspaper spread out in front of him, however. His eyes were focused on something else entirely. At the specific moment of the scene, in the present moment, something that is easy. The word banal refers to something considered common, trivial, or unoriginal, characterized by a lack of novelty or interest. This term is often used in contexts where something becomes repetitive or predictable, thus losing its value or impact, as it brings nothing new or significant. Therefore, when referring to something as banal, we are indicating that this particularity has become so habitual that it no longer causes surprise or astonishment, falling into the realm of the ordinary and commonplace. The expression, every day, refers to the daily routine, the activities and experiences that occur in people's daily lives. This concept encompasses everything from the simplest tasks, such as getting up, having breakfast, and going to work, to moments of leisure and social interaction, such as interactions with family and friends. Everyday life is made up of a series of habits and customs that vary from culture to culture, in addition to being shaped by social, economic, and individual factors. In many situations, everyday life can be seen as a unique combination of responsibilities, pleasures, and challenges that everyone faces, resulting in a continuous flow of experiences that define each of our lives. However, the internal experience provided a truly incredible feeling, almost like a true miracle. That residence, which had been utterly silent and tomb-like in its lifelessness, now seemed to have a new way of breathing, as if it had acquired a new vitality. The silence persisted. That was an undeniable fact. However, it was no longer a matter of being absent. It was a silence that expressed genuine respect and deep care, characteristic of people who understand that it's not necessary to occupy every inch of space to feel present and close. This kind of understanding reveals the wisdom of being in company without the need to constantly talk or make noise, but rather simply share the tranquility and harmony that arise from mere proximity. These days, Matthias had a habit of leaving his toys disorganized and scattered around the room, creating a messy environment. The door was slightly open while I slept. From time to time, he would chuckle quietly at some funny situations shown on television. Jonathan could no longer pinpoint the exact moment when this whole situation had become a regular part of his daily life. However, he was fully aware that he could no longer envision his life as a solitary one, without the presence of others around him. The idea of being alone had become unbearable, and thus he found himself besieged by the need for company. The way I used to eat is no longer the same. The next morning, they left the place very early, even before the sun was at its highest point in the sky. Matthias was wearing a pair of brand new sneakers and a coat that was fully zipped up to his chin, giving off a cozy feeling. He also carried a folded sheet of paper containing a drawing he had made depicting 3 figures, himself, Sophia, and Jonathan, which was undoubtedly very meaningful to him, and which he carefully kept in his pocket. The notary's office in question didn't have a pleasant appearance, nor was it a space that stood out for its beauty. It was, in fact, a space that lacked visual appeal. The pale walls exude a sense of antiquity, while the characteristic aroma of aged paper permeates the air around us. Furthermore, the benches are uncomfortable, featuring hard surfaces that don't offer the desired welcome. However, in that space filled with signatures, records, and the formality of notarization, something profound was unfolding, manifesting itself intensely and meaningfully. The conversion of a connection that cannot be directly perceived into something palpable and tangible, something that can be visually identified and understood. This shift is significant, as it allows something that previously existed in an abstract form to become a material reality, something that can be felt and understood more clearly. As Jonathan placed his signature on the final document, a feeling of nervousness took hold of him, causing his hand to tremble visibly. He turned his gaze toward the boy beside him, and as he did so, noticed in his eyes an intriguing combination of fear and hope, which seemed to intertwine intensely. Like someone who wants to believe, but who, having been disappointed countless times throughout their life, finds it difficult to do so simply and without reservation. This person, despite having a desire for faith, finds themselves limited by past experiences that make this task a significant emotional challenge. Matthias, at one point, didn't ask any questions. She simply squeezed Jonathan's arm very tightly. And this action alone conveyed all the emotions and meanings involved in the situation. During the night, after arriving home, Jonathan went to the boys' room. Matthias was once again drawing, dedicating himself to this creative activity. 3 images were presented, and now we have the addition of a 4th. Sorry, I don't have enough information to identify this person. Could you provide more details or context? This is a dog, a domestic animal widely known for its loyalty and excellent companionship. Dogs are often considered family members and come in a variety of breeds, sizes, and temperaments, each with their own distinct characteristics and personalities. We don't have one yet, but I thought it could be part of the family. Jonathan, showing joy, smiled broadly. It was a smile that, so awkward, became one of the most unusual and peculiar ever seen. However, it demonstrated sincerity. We might have a conversation about this. Matthias let out a soft, discreet laugh, almost as if he were experiencing the experience of discovering how to laugh for the first time in his life. In some situations, it's safe to say that life doesn't restart in a grand way. Like a fireworks display, there's no applause in recognition, not even a melody playing in the background to accompany the scene. Just a simple, tiny gesture, a look returned, a cup of coffee shared amidst the enveloping silence. And at a certain point, when you realize the situation, you realize that, in fact, you're no longer in the company of loneliness. Jonathan still feels a significant absence of Sophia in his life, which leads him to reflect on how much he misses her. She remains visible in the photographs displayed on the bookshelf, in the notebooks carefully stored in the drawer, and in the delicate scent of lavender that still persists from the sheets. However, these days, this same condition is also reflected in Matthias's eyes, in the way he wraps his arms around others with more confidence and security, in the delicate and soft way he says goodnight, using an intonation that still reveals a slight hesitation in his voice. It's interesting to note how he refers to the man who is his father, although at times he may forget that, in the not-so-distant past, he felt a certain fear when uttering that word directly and affectionately. Sophia, besides leaving, left not only a feeling of longing, but also a series of memories and memorable moments that will remain in the minds and hearts of those who had the opportunity to know and spend time with her. She decided to abandon a bridge that stood in her way. This decision may be related to several factors, such as changes in her plans or a search for new paths to follow, thus demonstrating a significant and symbolic act of transition or deviation from a previously established path. And without realizing it, Jonathan made the crossing. It appears you typed an expression that lacks clear context. If you can provide more information or a specific text you'd like me to paraphrase, I'd be happy to help. Please share the content you'd like me to rephrase. At this point, I address my words to those who have stayed this far. It's possible that at some point in your life you've experienced the intense feeling that everything you had or valued was completely lost, or that you were struggling with something you had no idea how to begin. It's possible that, like Jonathan, you felt like the time for change had already passed, making it too late to make any meaningful changes. Or, as with Matthias, whose presence isn't enough to keep anyone by his side long enough for that person to truly choose him. However, sometimes what a person truly needs is a space where they can simply be. On many occasions, you may be unsure of what message or response to offer. On many occasions, you may not feel strong enough or energetic enough. However, simply being present represents a significant first step. If, by chance, this narrative evoked some kind of emotion in you or somehow resonated within you, it's important to acknowledge that this story belongs to you too. Of course, please provide the text you'd like me to paraphrase. If this section truly resonated with you, you can contribute to our channel through a feature called Super Thanks. This statement truly has a huge impact and is incredibly meaningful. If you want to hear even more powerful stories, subscribe now. Comment your opinion on the story and share it with 5 people you love. Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.